Mark Foster's jealousy turned deadly when Thomas Hale, the man dating his ex-wife Emily, was crushed beneath a massive boulder in a shocking murder that rocked a quiet town. What dark secrets drove this brutal crime, and who else was involved in this deadly conspiracy? The small town of Ridgewood had always been a quiet place where neighbors knew each other by name, and nothing much ever disturbed the peaceful routine. But one chilly autumn evening, that calm was shattered by news that would send shockwaves through the community. Thomas Hale, a respected businessman known for his generosity and charm, was found dead in a way so brutal and unexpected that it seemed almost unreal. The discovery took place in a remote park on the outskirts of town, a spot usually visited by couples and families enjoying the fresh air. Instead of laughter and light, the park now held a terrifying scene that would haunt the town for months. Thomas's body was discovered beneath a massive boulder, which had somehow been moved to crush him with deadly force. The sheer weight of the rock and the violent nature of the crime stunned everyone who heard about it. Police officers, forensic experts, and even experienced detectives struggled to piece together what had happened and why. The idea that someone would deliberately use such a heavy object to kill a man was both horrifying and bizarre. The story quickly spread, and whispers began about who could be responsible for such a shocking act. As investigators started digging deeper, they uncovered details that pointed toward a darker side of Thomas's personal life. Thomas had recently been dating Emily Foster, a woman who had gone through a very difficult divorce from her husband, Mark Foster. Their marriage had ended bitterly, with years of fighting over money, custody of their young daughter, and a growing resentment that spilled into every aspect of their lives. Mark was known to be a man with a quick temper, and many in town had seen him lash out in anger on more than one occasion. His anger toward Emily was no secret, and the thought that his bitterness might have escalated to violence made him an obvious suspect. But this case was not simple. The relationship between Thomas, Emily, and Mark formed a tangled triangle full of jealousy, secrets, and dangerous emotions. The night Thomas died, no one could explain why such a massive boulder had been moved to crush him. The park was secluded, with only a few witnesses reporting seeing strange figures wandering late at night. But no one saw the crime itself. Adding to the mystery was the fact that security cameras in the area were suddenly offline, their footage wiped clean as if someone had prepared in advance to cover their tracks. While the police focused on Mark Foster because of his past anger and his apparent motive, many people in Ridgewood couldn't believe that he could commit such a gruesome murder. Mark maintained his innocence, insisting that he had nothing to do with Thomas's death. But as the investigation moved forward, more and more evidence pointed to a calculated and brutal act fueled by jealousy and rage. It was clear that this was not a simple crime of passion, but something far more planned and chilling. The town residents were left to wonder how a seemingly ordinary man like Mark could be involved in such a horrific event, and how the peaceful life of their small community had been forever changed by one terrible night. The tragedy of Thomas Hale was only the beginning of a story filled with betrayal, secrets, and dark truths waiting to be uncovered. The investigation into Thomas Hale's death quickly revealed that this was no random tragedy or accident. The massive boulder that crushed him had not simply fallen by chance or natural causes, it had been moved deliberately. Forensic experts examined the scene closely and discovered marks around the base of the rock that suggested tools had been used to shift it. It was clear that someone had planned the murder with precision, using the environment to carry out a brutal and effective crime. Nearby surveillance cameras, which might have captured crucial evidence, had mysteriously gone offline just hours before the murder. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had intentionally disabled the cameras to avoid being caught on tape. Investigators were faced with a frustrating void in the timeline of events. No footage meant no clear view of who had been lurking around the park that night, making the search for suspects more complicated. However, witnesses did come forward with reports of a shadowy figure seen near the park late in the evening, but no one could provide a clear description or identity. Attention soon turned to Mark Foster, Emily's ex-husband. Mark had been angry and bitter since the divorce. His resentment toward Emily and her new relationship with Thomas was well known throughout Ridgewood. Social media posts and overheard conversations revealed that Mark had been threatening and warning Emily to stay away from other men. But anger alone wasn't a tea enough for the police. They needed solid evidence to link him to the crime scene. Mark insisted that he had been home alone on the night of the murder, but his alibi was shaky. Neighbors recalled hearing his truck outside around the time of the crime, and tire tracks found near the park matched the tires on Mark's vehicle. These details placed him in the vicinity, but they still weren't enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Police knew they had to dig deeper. Forensic analysis of the boulder itself added new clues. Experts found traces of a special lubricant around the base, indicating that the rock had been carefully prepared to make it easier to move. This meant the killer had planned every step in advance and had the tools and knowledge needed to execute such a difficult task. It was no ordinary crime of passion. It was methodical and ruthless. The investigation also uncovered evidence of surveillance and counter-surveillance. Someone had clearly planned to avoid detection by tampering with the cameras and covering their tracks. The sophistication suggested that the killer was someone who knew the park well and understood how to manipulate the scene. Meanwhile, tension in Ridgewood grew as rumors spread and fear took hold. Friends and family struggled to understand how a man like Mark, who was known for his temper but not for violence of this scale, could be involved in such a terrible act. Questions filled the air. Was Mark truly the killer, or was someone else hiding behind his angry reputation? What role did Emily play in all of this? Had she known more than she admitted? As the investigation pressed on, detectives felt they were chasing shadows, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that was more complex than anyone had imagined. The evidence was mounting, but the true story behind Thomas Hale's death remained hidden beneath layers of deception, jealousy, and fear. The case was far from solved, and the next revelations would shock Ridgewood even more. As the investigation deepened, new and unexpected twists began to surface, turning the case into a tangled web of secrets and suspicion. While Mark Foster remained the primary suspect, detectives soon realized that the story was far more complicated than a simple act of jealousy or revenge. Behind the scenes, Emily Foster's behavior raised new questions that pulled her into the center of the inquiry. It came to light that Emily had been meeting secretly with a private investigator in the days leading up to the murder. She wanted to know more about Mark's movements, his contacts, and whether he was capable of carrying out such a violent act. This revelation cast a shadow of doubt on her role. Was she a worried ex-wife seeking protection, or was there a more sinister motive at play? Further digging revealed that Thomas Hale had been receiving threatening messages before his death. These messages came from an anonymous burner phone, making it nearly impossible to trace the sender. Phone records linked the burner phone to a location several miles outside Ridgewood, in a town where no direct connection to any of the main suspects was known. Yet, investigators found a chilling connection. The burner phone had been used to communicate with Mark Foster just hours before the murder took place. This suggested a possible conspiracy, or at least some form of collusion between the two men. But why would Mark send threatening messages to the man his ex-wife was dating? The investigation took an even darker turn when a hidden camera was discovered near the site of the murder. The camera, cleverly concealed among the trees, had recorded a grainy but crucial piece of footage. It showed two figures approaching the boulder just before the fatal event. One figure was seen pushing the massive rock down the hill, while the other waited nearby, watching. The footage was unclear, but the movements were deliberate and coordinated, indicating that the murder was planned by at least two people working together. Identifying the second figure became a priority, but despite extensive efforts, the identity remained a mystery. The footage did not match anyone in the police database, and no witnesses could confirm seeing anyone else in the park that night. This shadowy accomplice became the missing link in the investigation, raising questions about who else might have been involved in the crime. Adding to the complexity, Emily's actions in the days before the murder began to look suspicious. She had purchased large life insurance policies on Thomas just weeks before his death, something she had not disclosed to investigators. This raised the possibility that Emily might have had a financial motive for wanting Thomas dead. The once clear narrative of a jealous ex-husband seeking revenge became clouded by greed, deceit, and betrayal. Police also uncovered emails and messages that revealed tension not only between Mark and Thomas, but also between Emily and Thomas himself. Their relationship was not as perfect as it seemed on the surface. Arguments about money, trust, and Emily's lingering attachment to Mark created a volatile atmosphere. This instability suggested that more than just jealousy was at work. There were layers of manipulation and hidden agendas. The case that began as a straightforward crime of passion was now unfolding into a complicated story of collusion, secret dealings, and unexpected alliances. With new evidence pointing in multiple directions, detectives faced the challenge of untangling who truly orchestrated the murder, who was the accomplice in the shadows, and what dark secrets Emily Foster was hiding behind her innocent facade. The truth was still buried beneath layers of lies, waiting to be uncovered. The courtroom was packed with tension as the trial for the murder of Thomas Hale began, drawing attention from across Ridgewood and beyond. Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of jealousy, rage, and calculated violence, arguing that Mark Foster had carried out the brutal murder to punish his ex-wife Emily and her new partner. They presented the tire tracks near the park, the damaged surveillance cameras, and Mark's history of angry outbursts as evidence that he was capable of such a terrible crime. The prosecution's narrative was clear, a jealous husband driven to madness. But the defense team worked hard to dismantle this story, pointing out gaps and contradictions in the prosecution's evidence. They argued that much of the evidence was circumstantial and that no direct proof connected Mark to the actual act of murder. They highlighted inconsistencies in witness testimonies and questioned the reliability of the forensic findings. Mark's lawyers insisted that he had been framed, someone who wanted to pin the crime on him because of his troubled past and reputation. The courtroom was left with uncertainty about what truly happened on that fateful night. Then, in a stunning turn of events, the defense revealed new evidence that no one had anticipated. During the search of Emily Foster's personal belongings, a letter was discovered, hidden away, unsigned, and carefully folded. The letter was a confession, but not one that Mark had written. Instead, it was from Emily herself. In it, she admitted to having orchestrated the entire murder plot, carefully planning to frame Mark and collect insurance money from Thomas's death. The letter detailed a cold, calculating plan driven by greed and desperation, revealing a side of Emily no one had seen before. The courtroom was thrown into chaos as the judge ordered Emily to be taken into custody. This confession changed everything. The once simple story of a jealous ex-husband took on new layers of deceit and manipulation. Emily, who had played the role of the victim and grieving partner, was now the mastermind behind the murder. Prosecutors quickly shifted their focus, charging her with conspiracy to commit murder and framing her as the architect of the horrific crime. Evidence from the hidden camera footage was re-examined with this new perspective. The grainy images of two figures working together now seemed to fit the theory that Emily had an accomplice helping her execute the plan. Investigators dug deeper, seeking to identify who had assisted in pushing the boulder and tampering with the cameras. The mystery accomplice became the missing piece in the puzzle, as the case transformed from a straightforward murder into a complex web of conspiracy. Meanwhile, Mark's role in the crime was reconsidered. While his anger and past did not excuse violent behavior, the court now had to determine if he had been manipulated and used as a scapegoat by Emily. His alibi, once questioned, gained renewed attention, and witnesses who had doubted him began to speak differently. The defense argued that Mark had been caught in the middle of a dangerous plot he did not fully understand. In the end, the courtroom battle became a fierce contest between two sides, each with its own dark truths. The trial exposed the destructive power of jealousy and greed, but it also revealed how far people might go to protect themselves or get revenge. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the town of Ridgewood waited anxiously, knowing that the shocking revelations had only just begun to surface. The case was no longer about a simple act of violence, but about unraveling a deeply disturbing conspiracy with consequences that would haunt everyone involved. The final chapter of the trial brought a mixture of relief, shock, and sorrow to Ridgewood. After weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and the presentation of harrowing evidence, the jury reached their verdict. Mark Foster was found guilty of first-degree murder, his anger and history of violence contributing to the decision. However, the court also convicted Emily Foster on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and framing her ex-husband, confirming that she had orchestrated the plan to kill Thomas Hale. The judge delivered harsh sentences, reflecting the cruelty and premeditation behind the crime. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as the judge outlined the consequences. Mark would spend the rest of his life behind bars, while Emily faced decades in prison for her role as the mastermind. The dual convictions sent a clear message. The law would not tolerate the deadly mix of jealousy, greed, and deception that had destroyed so many lives. But despite the legal closure, the community struggled to come to terms with what had happened. In Ridgewood, the shock of the case lingered long after the verdict. The peaceful town that once seemed so safe was now marked by tragedy and betrayal. The story of Thomas Hale's death became a constant reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary lives could lie dangerous secrets and violent intentions. People who had known Mark, Emily, and Thomas found themselves questioning how well they truly understood those around them. The boulder that crushed Thomas became a symbol of the darkness hidden beneath the town's calm exterior. Families affected by the case tried to move forward, but the scars ran deep. Emily's daughter, caught in the middle of her parents' bitter feud, faced a future shaped by loss and confusion. Friends and neighbors mourned Thomas, remembering him not as a victim, but as a man whose life had been stolen by jealousy and greed. The trial had exposed painful truths, but it also brought some measure of justice and closure. The investigation and trial also left unanswered questions. The identity of the second accomplice who helped Emily was never fully revealed, and rumors persisted about others involved behind the scenes. Some believed more secrets lay buried, suggesting that the conspiracy might have been wider than the courtroom had shown. This lingering uncertainty kept the story alive in the minds of Ridgewood's residents, fueling speculation and fear. For law enforcement and legal teams, the case served as a powerful lesson in the complexity of human motives and the importance of thorough investigation. What had begun as a seemingly simple crime of passion turned into a chilling reminder of how far people could go to hide their true intentions and manipulate those around them. The successful prosecution of both Mark and Emily was seen as a victory for justice, but it also highlighted the tragic cost of such crimes. In the end, the story of Thomas Hale's death was more than just a tale of murder. It was a cautionary example of how obsession, betrayal, and revenge can spiral out of control, destroying lives in their wake. Ridgewood would never forget the night a man was crushed beneath a boulder, nor the dark secrets that led to that terrible moment. It was a grim reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those closest to us.